Marketing organizations or organizations in general, we're seeing this shift. I got a business to run. I've got numbers I need to hit. I need my people in my line. What did I say? Scrappy, nimble, do more with less. That's when, as an agency, you need to go hard. You need to jump in there and say, look, I got you. I think marketers and organizations, again, across sectors, they're looking for their partners, their agencies, to also be flexible. What does your client need? What are they struggling with? And with the trend towards a more decentralized organization, that will even get more prevalent.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to this. I'm your host, Shauna Griffiths. And today's conversation is a real talk with a real leader who I am just so honored to know and have on the show today. He is a veteran in B2C and B2B marketing and communications, has worked with some of the world's largest and most prominent financial and fintech firms. We're talking about NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, GE Financial, and MF Global. And that's just some of them, folks. So, Russ Rubino, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you very much, Shauna. Thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So, folks, I always let you know how I know my guests. And Russ and I have been getting to know each other. We are both part of the changeforce.ai management consulting team. And my area, as I've shared with you, is in the growth strategy space. And Russ's area is in the organizational effectiveness space. So we are both senior consultants, again, as a part of the changeforce.ai management consulting firm. And so this conversation is going to have a lot to do with the dynamics that are going on and that we're anticipating in between marketers and agencies. So before we get into that, Russ, I would love for you to tell folks about your career evolution. Like, how did you get in your lane and stay there in such a big way?
So here's the funny thing about that stay in your lane. I actually haven't stayed in my lane.
Okay. Good catch.
And it's been a very kind of circuitous route for me, but one that I would never ever want to take out or change. And
Okay.
and the reason I say that is I came out of college many years ago. I won't say what year. And I went straight into the agency world. Like I knew I was going to be a marketer. I knew that was the path. And so, bounced around in a number of different, very large agencies, McCann and Gray and Darcy,
Okay.
and then flipped over to sales. So from there, I kind of went into a sales role, which again, I really didn't know a lot about sales, but I did that for about 3-4 years. I don't really ever want to do that again, but I will say this. It was one of the most crucial kind of training grounds. It forces you to think about all aspects of how an organization works and the highs and lows of sales and dealing with that emotionally, and just really trying to understand what is your client trying to solve for, and that kind of training your brain is critical. And I was never kind of a glad handing, heavy sales guy. So I was always trying to be the consultative sales guy. So hopefully that's kind of, paid off for me along the way. So I did sales for a little while, then shifted from sales into the in-house side of the house. And I worked at IBM for a couple of years, but then kind of really moved into the fintech financial space. And so spent 10 years at GE Financial, Genworth Financial. And the interesting kind of pivot there was that, I was hired as a marketer, right? I was launching a brokerage site for GE and mutual funds for GE and had, all this marketing background. And then 9/11 happened. And I was sitting there with my boss, who I've worked for twice, a great guy. And he's like, Russ, he's like, there's no more money. Like everything is shut down. And I'd love for you to stay, but like you can't do marketing. There's no marketing. So, however, if you want to stay, I need a right-hand guy to help me consolidate a bunch of broker dealers that GE Financial is buying and Genworth is buying. And I need somebody to like just project manage and help me and do strategy and figure out what we need to do. And he's like, I'd love to, I've seen what kind of guy you are. I'd love to have you join me over here, but it's not marketing. It's a very different path, very different lane, right? To your question about lanes.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, market's not great. The economy's not great. And I love my boss and I'm at GE, like, what the heck? And so that was one of the kind of pivot moments for me where I completely shifted lanes. And I went on to join, his name was Adam Rucklin. In this venture, I became green belt certified. Didn't know what that, Six Sigma, didn't know what that was. I got my Series 7, I got my Series 24, my 56, and I ended up running the back office of a 3,000 person broker dealer. And I kind of looked back at that and was like, how did I ever end up doing that? Right? Like but my point in that, and then what eventually happened is Adam actually left and I followed him to a different place and kind of got back into the marketing lane at NASDAQ and at ICE and at MF Global. But the really interesting thing about that pivot is don't sell yourself short, right? In terms of what you can accomplish and what you can do, and be flexible. Like I didn't know what I was doing. You just kind of go. And as long as you take your common sense, take your skills that you've done in other areas and apply them to someplace else, you can be really successful and you can learn a bunch of things that you would have never expected. And I did things when I was at GE, like, we automated processes for scanning documents and opening up accounts and things like that. So I understood the back office, and then the middle office, and I'd done the front office already. So, as a marketer, now that I'm here today with you, I feel that kind of all of those paths have given me that full view of what it's like to sit in the back office, right? Where people are just like heads down, grinding all day, what it's like to be in the middle office with tech and processes and trying to make things happen. Then obviously what it means to be a salesperson and what it means to be on the front end, as a salesperson or a marketer. So, combining all of those three things together, I think has really positioned me well for applying that, with Changeforce and with other firms along the way. So a very long answer to your question, but I think it's a somewhat of a unique background and in a unique environment. There's obviously thousands of people who come out of school and they're in marketing, and that's the lane they stay in, and they do the same thing for their entire career, and that's amazing, right? But I have not stayed in the lane, and I've gone in through these different machinations. And I think it's really served me well to give me a much bigger lens to view the world in and to view companies' problems and situations in.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad that you went through all of that. And one thing I'll point out that struck me is your ability as you continue to evolve your career and yourself was to see possibility and to see, like, in a time when 9/11, when like everything was in the gutter, basically, you saw in the conversation you had with your former boss, and when he brought something up to you, you were like, okay, wait a minute, I'm open to possibility, I'm open to this, what could be a game-changing idea. And and I just wanted to kind of pause on that for the audience as they're listening to it, because I do think that's really important. I think sometimes we can get in a place of like fear, or like, oh, I should do this or that, or even if we think we know exactly where we want to be, I do think there's a lot of value in seeing possibility and sort of exploring different avenues. And I love how you talked about, what I actually talked about is like your toolbox of skill sets and experiences. In doing that, in the way you evolved your career, you really filled up that toolbox in such so now you're like this ninja, and I think to your point, I think that a lot of people who want to stay in one lane only, and that's wonderful. And there is this other land of different things that, experiences that you can really bring so much to the table. So I just am really glad you brought up all of that.
I'm thrilled too. It is. It was very fun, and again, I wouldn't take any of it back. And hopefully, it serves me well going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like from the perspective of a seed of a marketer, because I too came from originally like the seed of marketing. And I think that having someone in a seat of marketing that understands that big picture and all the connectivity, it can be really powerful for that brand or that company, whatever the organization is. And I think from an agency perspective, now if I put that hat on,
Hat
that
on.
I've been in the agency world for, so many years now, it's also like a dream to have a client on that
Well,
marketing side who
yeah,
can see all of that. Yeah.
and that's, I mean, you nailed that one, right? So I think one of the things that has served me incredibly well is exactly that, right? So when I land a job at when I took over the job at NASDAQ or at ICE or wherever, and they had all these different agencies, right? Well, what are they doing? What are they trying to solve for? I remember vividly working with some people. I won't name the company, but they did a brief and they for the agency, and they didn't get back like what they wanted. And I'm like, well, did you give them what they really needed? Like, you're not providing them. And it was my boss, actually. So, you know, but she was not providing them with any real constructive direction. She would just say, well, it's not suiting me, or it's not grabbing me. And there was nothing concrete. And I'm sitting there saying, their heads are going to explode, right? Because they have no idea how to take what you're saying and improve it. And so, given that I was on the other side of that table, as you just said, for many, many years on the agency side, I was able to translate what what she was saying, or not saying for that matter, into concrete direction for the
Yeah.
agencies. That was, critical. And I've done that so many times, and again, it's been incredibly efficient for me to be able to do that. The other thing that I think is really important on the flip side of that is, as a marketer in a large organization, or B2C, B2B, you've got to also understand those salespeople, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
what do they want? What do they need, right? So you've got kind of the agency folks on one hand, and how do you get the maximum amount of value and product out of them? And then you've got your clients, who are the salespeople on the other side. And having sat in sales and know what that's about, again, it's like, okay, guys, come on, what do you really need? Like, do you really need the 10-page white paper? Like, are you really even going to read that or give that to your client? Or do you really just want like a website that, somebody can go to? So I think there's a nice play between those two groups, with the marketer sitting in the middle, and being kind of very conscious, very cognizant, and having sat in their seat. And that's, that is, I think, one of the true keys here.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's been helpful to me throughout my agency time when I'm in that seat dealing with a client, is to, I call it like putting on their hat. When I've been in your seat before, so I can understand these dynamics, or to ask certain questions. And I also talk about it as like, help me to help you. And what you
Right.
described with on that marketer side, and that dynamic of not really giving the full direction or the perspective to the agency side. Again, it's like in both C's, we really have to remember that it's each person's job to help the other to help them. And and I love when you talked about, really it's about empathy, I think, when you're thinking about, well, what do the salespeople need? And like, again, putting on their hat and being like, what are they facing on the front lines? And I'm really here, whether you're on the agency side or the marketing
Right.
communication side, to actually help all of those areas.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of times, the sales folks look at the marketing team and they're, they'll roll their eyes and like, oh yeah, they're just doing brand stuff and, whatever, like I'm out there with the client pounding the table.
Yeah.
And so that empathy, you use that word, really being there with them, going
Mhm.
on sales calls if you
Yes.
need to go on sales calls. I mean, I loved doing that
Yeah.
at a variety of places I was at, because you really need to feel what they're feeling. You need to
Mhm.
sit there and hear what they are hearing. And again, I think the same thing applies on the agency side.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had this background in that financial and fintech side. And so much of my background has been in like sports and entertainment and more of that, whether it was the brand side or the agency working with brands. But the reality is, we're talking about the same experiences. And I just say that for the audience because it doesn't, whatever seat you're sitting in, all of this is so applicable. And so I love what you said about you're that teammate for the marketer, the salesperson, the agency person. You really have to think about this extension of a team that you're making up. At the end of the day, all you're trying to do is win together.
Right. It's connective tissue.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all that said, tell us from your lens, like what are you seeing in the landscape, in the marketer landscape these days?
So I think there's a couple things going on. One of the biggest ones that I'm seeing is there is and this is a macroeconomic,
Yeah.
uh, you know, catalyst, I'll call it, right? M&A.
Oh,
M&A is prevalent. It's going to continue to be prevalent. The consolidation of various industries. I mean, I was in sports betting industry for a couple of years, and companies are getting gobbled up
yeah.
left and right. So I think that is one of the biggest things that will affect both marketers and the agencies that support them in a very, very big way. And we can kind of circle back to why. So I think the M&A aspect of, you've got, could be two big companies, could be one big, one small. Where do you fit in that organization? How do you
Mhm.
create synergies now
Yeah.
between the marketing functions? How do you integrate the teams,
Yeah.
right, between those two organizations? And again, you named where I've worked. Every one of those companies that I've worked at did at least two or three, you know,
Yeah.
acquisitions or mergers or whatever a year. So you're constantly dealing with, new people coming in and, okay, what's the best way to structure this? How do you get the most? Okay, what agencies do they have? Where do we have overlap on marketing or brand or social media platforms that you're using for listening, right? All of those things come into play. So I think M&A is a big, big factor that will continue to be on the board and on focus for agencies and marketers.
Yeah.
Number two, and I won't spend a lot of time this. I'm not an expert. I'm trying to be, but AI. I think AI. It's not going anywhere. It's only going to be more. I'm sure you've spoken about this on other podcasts that you've had. But the impact of AI and how clients are using it, how agencies are using it, what what jobs may get displaced or created out of it.
Mhm.
I think that's a very big function and a very big area that marketers need to focus on. And then the last thing that I'll say is I think, and it's kind of related to the first one, quite honestly, which is marketing organizations or organizations in general. We're seeing this shift a bit more now, again, because of mergers and acquisition, from what I would consider a core centralized marketing organization to a much more decentralized marketing organization. And I think that is becoming more prevalent because you have all of this M&A, right? And you've got all of these new business units and large companies coming together, and organizations are getting bigger, right? They're not getting smaller because they're gobbling up these various organizations. So now you're dealing with, companies that used to be 1,000, like overnight they're at 3,000 or they're at 5,000. And so keeping that core COE, center of excellence, and having everything right there in that centralized area is it's there's a lot of pushback, and
Mm.
more of the business units, product units, whatever, are saying, I got a business to run. I've got numbers I need to hit, right? I need my people in my line, and I need to be able to direct them so that I can hit those numbers, and not, have corporate, quote unquote, right? Big corporate controlling what campaigns, what dollars I get to spend, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be kind of my third, what's happening in kind of the macro level
Yeah.
from a marketing agency perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm seeing that so much, and I've been a part of so many of the mergers, the acquisition, all of that happening, and especially because you're doing so much in this organizational effectiveness space. I'd love to hear your thoughts about like any guidance for how to do that in an effective way. And here's what let me pause and say what I mean. What I mean is from the respect of how people like the marketers feel in that moment, your people, how it affects the agencies. I think so many times those moments happen, the M&A, it all happens. And it's like, there's so much time and energy put into that. And then the what's next is kind of like, figure it out, build the plane as you fly it. And it's
Right.
so painful. And I
Yeah.
feel like there's so much waste that happens in that. So can you give any recommendations or thoughts about like, how do you do that effectively?
I think you're spot on, because it is such an afterthought, right?
It's
That,
such an
you've got, teams of finance people and investment bankers and the
yeah.
C-suite, and they're all just focused on the numbers, right? What are the numbers?
Mhm.
And how do we get the numbers right? So then it happens. And then, all of a sudden you're looking around and you got, 3 people that are in charge of brand, and 4 people that are, in 5 different social listening platforms, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're spot on that. You just kind of get handed this big bag. I think it is somewhat of a process, and it's not a quick process, to be honest with
No.
you. I think you've got to, go through your basics with this. And again, I've been through this many times. And that is first step, assess, right?
Yeah.
Simple stuff. What do you have? What don't you have? Where do you have overlap? What people do you have? And assessing all those people. Obviously, step 1. Step 2, okay, that corporate is going to be looking for cost savings.
Right.
It's just, that's why they do these things. There's
Mhm.
going to be synergies, right?
Yeah.
So you better get in front of that as opposed to being on the back end. And so I think after you do your assessment, you've got to look at where there are synergies, and you've got to look at optimizing, as you pointed out, right, for operational effectiveness. How do you take this and how do you now restructure it to gain as much synergies as you possibly can, as many synergies as you possibly can, and keep the best of the best to be able to move forward. And I think in our new world, it's all about nimbleness, being scrappy,
Mhm.
doing more with less, and those those are all the things that corporate wants to see. Like, they don't want to
Mhm.
see you taking a 50-person marketing organization, going to 100 after an M&A, and having it end up being 120 people, right? Oh, I
Yeah.
need to add 20 more people. Like, that is just not happening. So you've got to look at what does the organization, what are they looking for, and
Mhm.
getting ahead of that.
Mhm.
And again, that's where agencies, I think, can really play a critical role, right? So, you go through this M&A, right? You've got to have, as an agency, you need to be incredibly aware of what's going on. B,
Right.
you've got to immerse yourself in
Mhm.
what challenges they're facing. And 3, you've got to become essential. And that is, for me, having gone through this, what did I say? Scrappy, nimble, do more with less, right? Well, how do you do that if you've just taken out, some serious headcount? They might have slashed your
Yeah.
budget. Well, you need to rely on your agency to help you get there, to really get you through those barriers, break through those walls. And so that's when as an agency, like, you need to go hard. You need to jump in there and say, look, I got you. We are here. I'm SWAT teaming this, with our team here at the agency, and we are going to help you solve your biggest challenges now that you guys have just kind of done this merger. And becoming that essential agency aligns you to continue to play in the space, because you know that every acquisition is going to come with multiple agencies that they all used. Make it up 5, 10, who knows how many agencies they've got doing various things. You don't want to be the one that's cut, right? You want to be one of those 1 or 2 agencies where, as the CMO or the SVP, like, no, Acme's staying. I need them on this. They're going to help me get to where we need to go. Yeah, I could probably lose, Z, X, and Y or whatever. But Acme, they're in this with us.
Yeah.
And they're going to help me solve. So that is, I think, just an essential situation. And that doesn't have to apply, and I'll wrap this up, Shauna, just to M&A activity. It can be a crisis situation. I mean, when I was at Brunswick Group, I was a consultant at Brunswick Group for a number of years. Fantastic organization, amazing work. Like, we were the crisis shop. Like, that was, if you had a crisis, you went to Brunswick. Like, you need those guys. Be essential, be critical. And that's where an agency can really set itself apart and take advantage, more importantly, of these kind of turbulent times that we're all kind of going through now. I'll just kind of.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes so much sense. The first thing that hit me as you were chatting about that was going back to what we were saying at the beginning about needing to be a team. Because I think a lot of times what happens is those, whether it's crisis or it's M&A, people can really go into fear mode. We're like, oh shit, I'm going to be replaced. Whether you're the agency side, I'm going to get cut. Whether you're the marketing side,
Right.
oh, I'm going to get replaced by my agency. And so I think when we operate from a place of fear in those moments, it's like I said earlier about like your ability to see possibility. What you're talking about here is even like encouraging people not to move from a place of fear and be like, oh, I'm going to get replaced, but actually like see possibility in this. Work with your teammate to get ahead of things, stay ahead of things, solve for it, advocate for each other. And then even when you were saying that also, it's like, well, if you're on the marketing side and you're like, gosh, you know what, I need to not have to pay for this tool that I'm using. Maybe talk to your agency. Did they use the tool? Can you get
Correct.
it at a better rate by leveraging something that they have? So again, I point those things out because it's, a bit of ironically, we're just talking about that need to really partner together, work well, be to your point. Like if you're on the agency side, you got to be ahead of it. You got to be like, like you said, like you're invaluable to them.
Here's the other thing that I don't think we've spoken about. And again, I think it's all part and parcel, right, with what we're talking about, is I think marketers and organizations, again, across sectors, they're looking for their partners, their agencies, to also be flexible, be fungible. And that could be on a variety of different levels, right? That can be related to pricing, right? Let's set up a pricing scheme. I mean, I'm working with a client right now where they want me to be as incentivized for success as they are. Like, you know what? I'm pretty confident in my capabilities. I'll sign up for that. I want more upside, but I am willing to forego kind of a flat fee project, basic whatever. I'll participate in the upside with you. So it can be that. It can be pivoting in terms of, again, like I did, back at GE, but, a client says, hey, I know we've used you for X. do you have any capabilities in Y? Or I really need Y or Z. Like, oh, absolutely. We can pivot to that. We've got a team of people that we haven't even talked to you about that do that. So having the ability to be flexible and again, it goes back to what does your client need? What are they struggling with? And how can you help solve issues as opposed to creating issues?
Yeah.
So that ability to listen and come up with flexible ideas related to whatever you're trying to solve for, I think is also really, really critical there as well going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what we're talking about is not just the responsibility of the most senior person on the marketing team,
No.
on the agency, that the client servicing team. And this is really just for the audience that like, this is why I believe so firmly in every person within that group needs to be able to understand that this is how we as a group are thinking. These are the whys of how we're operating and why we're operating that. I want my coordinator to know that just as much as the CMO. And I think that it's not just a little thing, it's a big thing because it gets everybody thinking along the same terms. Again, every single person is thinking, I need to solve the problem. I need to solve a problem here. My problem, their problem, the partners, all of that. So I just, again, I think it's so critical that the person who's, again, coordinator, manager, because I think too often, if not, it's like people have just a tendency to go in whatever silo it is that they're working on. Siloed into marketing, not thinking about the sales team. Siloed into thinking about this piece of paper I need to turn in by the end of the day. Well, again, what is it laddering up to? Where's the business impact that I'm creating?
And with the trend towards a more decentralized organization, that will even get more prevalent because now you don't have that central hub of corporate think where it gets pushed down to the entire organization. As you just said, you've got silos of business units that are like, well, my business unit's the only one that matter. I don't really care what that business unit is doing or what they're doing. This is our structure. So it becomes even more difficult to get your message to be able to lead against that single charge. It's just going to be more and more difficult. So the focus on that, the more you can do to get that and keep that going, regardless of structure, decentralized or centralized, is going to be truly critical.
Right, absolutely. And so when we're in these shifts to the more decentralized, as you're saying, like, are there some risks that we really need to call out for people? Like again, thinking kind of like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater type thing. Like, where can you give some people some guidance around? It might be the risk side, it might be the benefit side, but just some things to really keep in mind when taking those actions.
Yeah, I've seen a couple things, and some of them are really. I think it depends on where you sit and what your job is. To be blunt, and that probably holds true with anything.
Yeah.
Here's a couple of risks and a couple of things to be cautious of. When you shift to that decentralized model, and you're a product marketer, right? You're now sitting in the business, right? You used to sit in corporate. Well, who's your boss now? Is your boss the SVP of sales? Is your boss the head of product? Is your boss the head of engineering? Like, who knows who your boss is at that point? So so from a career perspective and a professional development perspective, you need to be really conscious of how that person or people, whatever the makeup is, do they have your back? Do they understand what your job is and what your challenges are to the level that somebody that obviously is a career marketer would or would not? And are they going to give you the tools for you to really progress, right? Especially for a young marketer, right? Who, wants to learn, wants to develop, wants to, be a part of a a broader kind of, think on marketing and brand and all that stuff. And now all of a sudden you're sitting and you're reporting up through, the sales organization. Well, that could be challenging, really challenging. So I think that's one really important kind of risk that can be mitigated.
Right.
But I think as a marketer going through something like that, you need to be really mindful of what that structure is and whether that's the right position for you longer term. Okay, that would be number one. Number two is, I think, again, it depends on, are you, again, a product marketer or are you a comms person, right? And so what I've kind of, seen a little bit of with one of my clients that's going through this is, well, it's fine for the product people because they were product marketing. They know the product. They're in the business. It's not that much of a shakeup. Yes, what I just talked about might be a problem, if they're reporting up through sales or something. But from a marketing perspective, they're kind of doing the same job, right? They same lane. Okay, well, let's take a comms person where all of a sudden I'm a business comms person and I'm supporting, product launches and new releases and things like that. And I had, the corporate comms guys sitting right behind me. Well, now I'm in the business and a crisis comes along. Well, okay, who's handling that? Is the business unit handling that? Am I, as I sit in the business unit? Because now it's a crisis, and that's potentially a corporate crisis. So now, like, what is the relationship between who's handling this, right? Because at a corporate level, I mean, talk about a hack, right? A cybersecurity hack, right? Happens all the time. Okay, well, yeah, I'm sitting in the business unit and I'm responsible for this, but this is a corporate issue because it's happening at a brand level, brand implication, reputation level. So how do you navigate that, right? If you're a corporate comms person and now the business is like, nope, we don't need you. You're good. We've got our person over here. And then all of a sudden, as soon as there's a firestorm, oh, guys, here, we need your help. Here's the big pile of, crap
Shit.
that, right. That just happened. You handle it. Well, WTF? Like you wanted to be your own deal. You wanted this structure. And now as soon as there's like one problem, obviously it could be a very big one, like now you want corp comms to come in and solve it for you. So I think that there's a little bit of that as well in terms of, and so if you're in that seat, it's can be a struggle, right? Because, okay, you don't want me now, but then tomorrow you do, and then you want me out, and then another thing happens and you want me involved. So I think there's a lot of where do we go from here with that kind of situation. So again, I think there's a little bit that depends on where you sit and what happens there. But those would be two kind of things that I've seen come into play very recently with that shift. And again, just going back to the agency, how as an agency can you help solve for those things? How can you be essential? How can you be flexible to help solve some of those issues?
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And everything that you described, very much through the lens of the marketing communications people. I literally went through that when I was on the agency side, and marketing communications sat under me from a client service. It also sat under me from from the agency brand itself, but then we had just been acquired. So now you've got this corporate comms, this big C, and it's like, so again, having to, when you were talking through all that, I'm like, I know exactly what you're saying from what I experienced, again, on the agency side, or even like I experienced some of that when I was working with the then New Jersey Net. So again, you go all the way over into the sports scene, and we had new ownership, and then we had another owner from Russia. All of this, it's like everything that you're saying is so relatable to everyone who's listening to this, is my point. And so it's so good to be talking about this so we can really hear, oh, wait a minute, I've got some empathy, or I have an idea of like, that person may have experienced that, or I have an idea of what that person is going through. And again, it just comes down to this relationship, as you talked about it. How can you really maximize a relationship that you have there?
Yep.
Yeah, it's so important. So you were the other day, you and I were talking, and you gave a little bit to me, and I asked if you would share it on the show, which is about a research project that you've been doing for a fintech company. So I'm curious if there's some key takeaways, some challenges that you are able to share with us, so that people just can get an idea of like a very real, tangible, without going into the details, obviously, of who the client is. But is
Sure.
there anything you can share with us?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what we just talked about. So that we've kind of barely started it.
Yeah.
We're just a few
Okay.
weeks in at this point. But it is an organization that has done multiple mergers, multiple acquisitions. They are always looking for cost takeout. What's the most efficient way to do that? They are always looking for synergies. And, you've had kind of a situation where you had a 10-year run of a centralized organization. And so camaraderie, collaboration, team, um, mutual learning, all of a sudden, literally, kind of ripped
Ripped
apart.
apart.
So you've got, a lot of people who are like, okay, like wasn't hired, like this wasn't how I've been working. I wasn't hired into this. And again, it goes back to, well, now I'm reporting into a business, and, do they really have my back? And, do they understand what it takes for me to do my job? So a lot of the same things that we just talked about are exactly in play here.
Mm.
And the mission is, okay, well, it just happened, so they're not going back, right? How do you make it better? How do you
Mm.
move forward?
Yeah.
Is there, not that there's going to be a hybrid, but are there strategies that you can deploy even though you're decentralized now, right? And I'm making it up because we haven't gotten there
Yeah.
yet, but how do you keep that connective tissue? How do you still create team? How do you still
Mm.
create collaboration, even though you don't technically report to me anymore and you're technically in a different group?
Mhm.
And, obviously you may sit in a different state or office or whatever, but you've got to find a way to keep everyone together. To go back
Oh,
to, what we were saying earlier, it
yeah.
is a team. And
Mhm.
if you just kind of, okay, well, we're done, they're off on their own, it's not going to work. and
Mhm.
and and things are just going to keep getting kicked back to you
Mhm.
anyway when shit hits the fan. So you might as well be proactive and
Mhm.
try to force, for lack of a better word, force a way of continuing that collaboration and that teamwork. And force, hey, monthly extended team meeting, right? And we're going to cover, what's happening at our corporate level. And we're going to cover next month, we're going to have the widget unit talk to us about how they're getting over these three issues in selling widgets and how they're marketing their selling of their widgets, which we can all learn from, right?
Yeah.
You need to uh, push those things further and really force that upon the organization, because otherwise, it's just going to keep separating
Yeah.
further and further, and the islands are going to keep pushing out further and further. And I just don't think that's, in the long term, um, the optimal structure for a large organization. And it doesn't help the agencies, right? Because now you've got all these different islands. They're working. Oh, I'm working with them. Oh, well, we have no idea that you're working with them. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing with them? Oh, we're doing the same thing for them that we want to do for you. Oh, we didn't know that, right? So you've
Mhm.
got to, on both sides of the house, you've got to try to bring people together in the best way you can. And I know that
Yeah.
sounds simple, but sometimes simplicity is actually what all you really need to do.
Yeah, it's simple and it's not easy. And I think
Right.
that, but there's a thread in there of communication. And it's like, well, what is the most important information to communicate at the right times? But I think, again, going back to what we were saying earlier, like how everybody's focused when the deal's getting done for, and it takes a long time. It's really interesting when that happens. It again doesn't matter if you're on the agency side or the marketer side. When there's that thing going on in the background, people start to feel it and they're like, what is going on? So there's this weird energy within the organization. What is this? And it's this weird sort of code of silence that you can start to sense. And listen, it's all like, I think most of the time well intended. They literally can't talk about it. And it goes
Right.
on for much longer than people
Which
think.
is the worst, when like certain people know what's going on,
Yes.
and then, everybody else, like, do you know what's going on? Well, I know a little, like, and then you feel like you're on the outside. Like it's a horrible feeling. It's horrible.
It is. It's horrible. And so I think like, as it's happening, again, like when the moment that you can start to tell it, just the care that happens there and having the right people, the right communication. And don't think for a moment that you're going to tell the most senior people and then nobody else is going to find out. Because again, it's like this, of course, people talk, but it's also people sense it. I'm telling you, you can have a coordinator that's going like, gosh, the senior leadership team hasn't been around much. What's going on? Or, oh, I heard this or that. So I think you were saying earlier about like get ahead of it. I think just like that thread of communicating, and you don't have to say everything, but it's like, what is the most valuable thing and sometimes that's a lot of like, what's going to put people's minds at ease for
Right.
the time being.
And here's the other factor, right? And a little digress, or a little, one pin to the left here. It's about what kind of culture you want to create. And culture, in my experience and opinion, is not something that can be pushed top down. Culture comes from the bottom. So to your point about that coordinator, down at the first rung, if that person isn't driving the culture that you want from the bottom up, then it's never going to happen, right? And so you need to again, to your point, you need to get the people that are the support structure, the framework of the organization, building up, as opposed to I'll tell you when you need to know, that kind of structure. So I've been a part of plenty of them. So
oh, trust me, I have been too. I've also been sort of in that leadership level where you want to operate differently with your team, but the way the organization it's happening is operating differently than necessarily I would want to operate. It is a really challenging time. So if anybody's listening to this, we are not saying anybody's good, bad, or different. We're literally having empathy because this is a really challenging experience that each of us have been through, whether it's on the marketing side, the agency side. So again, this is a we fully get it, and we're trying to talk through some solutions here. So as you've talked about some of the things that you are been happening and that you're expecting to continue, is there anything that you want to put a bit of an exclamation point around related to like the organization of a marketing department? Like, how do you think that might be affected? Is there anything that people should keep in mind?
I'm not. I think it goes back to a lot of what we talked about, which is the fact of being essential, being of value, and being flexible, right? Because again, if I go back to my days, Adam looked at me and said, okay, this guy's really good at what he does, but I don't need him to do that anymore. So, I need him to do this. So, how do you navigate in these worlds, right? Always be of value, like at the highest value, essential, same thing. Be flexible, and be immersive in what is happening around you, right? Again, culture, as we just talked about, starts from the bottom up. So being a part of it, being that positive force in the organization, those two or three things I think are always, when I'd like to think that I've been a pretty adept assessor of talent. and people that I want to work with. I think I've got a pretty good BS meter, and you want to work with people you like. And I'm literally hanging out this evening at a birthday party with 5 people that I worked with. We're all at different places now, but we're still great friends. And I think that is, a testament to how you need to hire and how you need to manage people, both up, down, and sideways. So it's all about that kind of positivity, being relevant, and being flexible in your role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I don't have much more time with you, so I just really want to thank you for coming on the show. I usually ask people takeaways, but I think you actually just wrapped it up in those takeaways. I think, no matter which side of the house you're sitting on, it's so important. And again, like the marketing side and the agency side can absolutely work together. But again, that's that we are a team, and how can you be, just invaluable on both sides. So I really appreciate all that you shared with us today, your insight, and I think you're just on such a roll, and you're going to be such a great teammate in our changeforce.ai
I am looking
team.
forward to
So
that.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Shauna. Have a
Yeah,
great day.
thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day. Thank
All right,
you.
take care. Bye-bye.